considered to be the biggest in sub-Saharan Africa and has already been rescheduled several times. In spite of this rescheduling and refinancing by creditors who are either members of the Paris Club, London Club, or independent creditors, arrears of the debt keep accumulating over time. Amid all of this rising debt profile, inflows of foreign investments into the country have been on a decline and seems to have slowed down for the past 5 years and have experienced a drop of almost 80%. According to the recent report by the National Bureau of Statistics, Nigerian foreign investment plunged from $6.7 billion in 2021 to $5.3 billion in the following year, recording a 21% year-on-year drop. Let's get talking, and a partner, senior economist, SPM professionals, Mr. Paul Alaje, a friend of the house, is joining from our Abuja studios today to speak more on this. Hello, Mr. Alaje. How are you today?
Thank you so very much for having me. Happy holidays.
Yes, 46.25 trillion naira. That was as at the end of December last year. Some say that figure, if we add the ways and means up from the CBN, we might be getting to about 70 trillion naira. That is large for a country that runs a budget far less than 20 trillion naira for a year and having this kind of debt. I know we've gone this route before, but at the moment, how worried are you about our level of debt?
Well, I'm so very concerned about our level of debt, and there are reasons why I am worried about the nation's level of debt. One is not just because of the cost of debt, it's also because of what we spend to service it. I'm not so bothered about the stock, but I'm bothered about the revelation shared by the Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning, where she had mentioned last year that Nigeria has spent over 80% of revenue to service debt. Rather than our debt reducing, as I speak to you, it's also increasing. Because when you look at ways and means, which of course the National Assembly have not yet granted the desire of executive, or properly speaking, the Debt Management Office. When that is done, according to the central bank regulation, government will need to pay 3 plus NPR. We know the value of NPR is currently high. You add 3% to that. That is what the federal government will pay in servicing debt. So when you know what that means, it means a year we might be looking at approximately 2 trillion, 3 trillion in 2 or 3 years, which means the next administration, for not borrowing any money, only on ways and means, that administration, other things being equal, ceteris paribus, that administration, if NPR remains the same, may spend between 5 to 7 trillion naira to service debt alone, not to pay back debt. Now, when you look at our revenue, you know, in previous years, I'm sure you will be as bothered as I am regarding how do we get funds to service these debts. That said, on the other hand, we also have concern about debt service, among other things that may affect the nation's debt. And that includes, number one, the relationship between what we are earning today and what we have in terms of revenue today. So if you look at our total debt and our total revenue, you wonder, how long are we going to spend? How long time will it take us to completely pay our debt if we want to pay today? But economists will tell you, well, paying the debt is not really what the issue is. The issue is, do you have capacity to service it? So you now say, what is the ratio between revenue and debt service? And when you look at ratio between revenue and debt service, don't believe my word, believe Honorable Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning. Out of every 1 naira government collected for Q1 2022, government took 80 kobo, and to be more contemporary, out of every 100 naira, government took 80 naira to service debt. You know the implication? The implication is that government spent 20 naira to pay salaries, to fuel presidential jet, to pay members of National Assembly. I don't now know, how do we get money to pay subsidy? When you have subsidy to the conversation, then you know that the remaining part of our economic life we go on borrowing. So on one hand, we are complaining that the fire is becoming hot and is burning us real fast, and we are looking for a way to quench it. Guess what we are doing? We ran to the nearest gas station and we bought enough fuel, not kerosene, not diesel. We bought petrol, pour it as though we are pouring water to end the crisis. Instead of us saying, hence to the concerns that we have, what we are seeing is bigger problem, more issue, and more concern. But this is the wrap of it all. This is what economists, and I mean conventional economists, bother about when it comes to the issue of debt. Unlike what many would say, what is the debt ratio to GDP? GDP is not giving us revenue. The Nigerian GDP, as we speak today, is over $500 billion. It's the largest in Africa. But when you compare our number, over 210 million people, probably speaking, about 220 million people sharing $500 million. In the United Arab Emirates, about 10 million people sharing a GDP of over $400 billion. So ours is $500 billion, theirs is $400 billion. The total number of heads sharing that the money circulates around is only 10 million. For ours is 220 million that is sharing that GDP. So the impact of GDP is really is not a correct measure of what happens. But let's look at the third one, which applied economists all over the world have come to settle with, that it's a way of measuring the impact of debt. It is what is the growth in debt? By what has our debt grown? If you use purely Naira terms, we have 12 trillion Naira debt exposure. You know, in 2015, by June 2015, the Debt Management Office put the figure at about 12 trillion Naira. Today, the official figure, apart from ways and means, which you and I know eventually will be added, we're talking of about 46 trillion Naira. You can say the multiple of that, but by how much has the economy really grown? The economy, rather than growing in the figure it was, as we speak, is barely over 3%. So the impact of this debt is not felt on the economy. So unlike several other countries that we have seen that, oh, they borrowed so much money, the question is, what did they do with it? Now, when you look at, you mentioned Dangote refinery, I know there is a lot of debt in that refinery, but that refinery, you can see the assets that has been built. So instead of us totally criminalizing that, we should also ask, by how much has debt impacted somebody in Kano? By how much has it impacted somebody in Oyo? By how much has it impacted somebody in Calabar, Lagos, and all over the country? The impact of debt must be felt positively. Unfortunately, as we speak, I wonder, even though we've seen some of the project government has done, I must say, like the rail project, like construction of some of the roads that we have seen, we've seen especially the hallmark of the administration, if you ask me, the Sukuk bond. These are some of the bonds, both green bonds, Sukuk bond, some of the funds that government had borrowed and have used. But you see, because of corruption that is endemic in the system, you hear 80-20, you hear 70-30, you hear 60-40, in some cases 50-50. It is not to share anything. It is the volume of kickbacks that goes back into those, into the pocket of those who are supposed to be in public space. President Buhari will not be in that space. And I tell you, most state government may not be in that space. But civil servants, those who are in charge of the awarding of contract and giving of this contract, the kickbacks that comes back to them, that goes to private pocket, rather than these monies going directly into government covers for us to boost our economy.
Interesting commentary there. Well, you took it from different angles. Well, it really makes sense. But I would also ask you two questions in one. First is, what is happening to the fiscal responsibility law in this part of the world? Are we following suit with regards to that? Then, the fresh $800 million for subsidy palliative is also generating concerns. I like your reactions to that too.
First of all, the answer to the first one is no. Most of the time, government has given the reasons why they've not been able to follow the Fiscal Responsibility Act. And I think that, like the word says, fiscal responsibility, we should be responsible to that law that says, what we must not spend beyond certain benchmark. Some of the benchmark are put against the gross domestic product in terms of what we can borrow or debt financing. We have seen over the years abandoned that law, and now the impact is on us. Even beyond the Fiscal Responsibility Act, even the central bank should not give more than 5% of the previous year revenue of government, that's a financial year of government, in terms of advances. Today, Ways and Means have taken another turn as multiples of monies have been given to government without really recourse to the National Assembly. But that said, I go to subsidy, where you have asked that government intention regarding, what's it called now? Government intention regarding what should be done to subsidy. You know, before I answer your question, I must be very quick to say that removal of subsidy, it's a conversation that has been had in many areas. And you know that you and I discussed this. I think sometimes we discussed it in 2020. And we also had this discussion sometimes in 2019. And I told you that President Buhari's administration can never remove subsidy. I remember that video very well. And I even saw it recently. And I was very, very clear why President Buhari will never remove subsidy. Today, if you go back to the video, and many Nigerians that have time to watch, they will now see the reason. The President Buhari administration is now saying by June, that is when he must have left office, by 29th of May, that subsidy will be removed. And it's not even a month after, some days after, a month after, the president might have left office. And I can tell you, the incoming president must do the needful before subsidy is removed. And if you ask me for the needful, there are about 3 of them that must be done. Before I now link it to your question of $800 million. But before I mention the needful, because I know your show especially is one that educates Nigerians, policymakers, government, and the governed. The $800 million we are talking about, when you prorate it to the number of heads or the household dependent, but let's lose head because people make the economy. And we are talking about $16 per head. If you use official figure, you are talking of something less than 10,000 or 11,000 naira, as the case may be, for people to cushion the effect. But this money is not dashed. Arguably, this money is also an exposure. This money is on credit. We have to pay back. The question now, therefore, is what must be done? To a large extent, we are only piling debt. We are not really solving the problem. But I believe that the incoming government will take a different posture. We take a different approach to the debt crisis we have. And rather than adding to it, there will be spending should be on what can repay back some of the debt we have borrowed. If we have time, I can mention what are the key 3 cardinal points that I think the administration should look at, especially as it has to do with subsidy, and eventually how to remove subsidy for Nigeria to be free from shackles of 3.3 trillion naira every half year and beyond.
Well, subsidy discussion obviously will be for another day. But let's also talk about reducing cost of governance, blocking leakages, all of this the way to go. Talking about the same revenue challenge. That is what I want us to look at. Mr. Paul, what do you think are some of the quick wins for the incoming administration with regards to this? We have a revenue challenge. We need to admit this fact.
Well, our biggest challenge is revenue challenge. President Buhari mentioned it when he presented his budget in 2018, December, for 2019 budget presentation. It was very apt, it was very right when he said the biggest challenge we had was not 2019 election, but how to generate revenue to finance that 2019 budget. So, but what should we be doing? I can tell you as I speak today that there are organizations in Nigeria that return in 5, 10, some 1 trillion naira. As I'm talking to you, organizations that are not involved in this part of our conversation, they are in our homes. But because you are viewing me in Lagos and I'm seeing you in Abuja, they are making money. Perhaps at the end of this show, many people that watch this show live on their phones, those organizations would have taken not less than 5 to 10 million naira across board. I'm not talking of just the 2 of us, but all the people that watch this video. But what are they doing? Why is it that the National Bureau of Statistics reported that this organization, even during COVID, even when we have recession, these sectors are growing beyond 5, 7 to 10% of their previous year. But why is it that the revenue that goes to government covers for these organizations, from this organization, I beg your pardon, continue to reduce? They are making more in terms of revenue, but what is going to government from this organization is arguably reducing. And I think this is what the next administration should look at. Get experts who can use technology, who can use knowledge, who can decipher what is happening across sector, instead of looking at how to collect more revenue from those that are small businesses. And I can tell you how critical they are to the economy can never be overemphasized.
Well, it's an interesting conversation, but we must leave it there today, Mr. Paul Alaje. I will have another time to definitely focus on subsidy and see what can be done to at least cushion that effect of the removal. Mr. Paul Alaje, thank you so much. Partner, senior economist with SPM Professionals. Do enjoy the rest of the holiday.
Thank you so very much for having me.